He was a quiet man. He was a typical, probably West Texas, small town guy who loved his family.
He wasn't concerned about the Joneses. He wasn't concerned about what everybody else was doing. The only thing that matters was that Mom was happy and his kids were taken care of. And he would sacrifice life and limb to make sure that happened. Dad was very influential in our community, in the soccer community. He started coaching me when I was 6 years old, and he coached me until I started playing select soccer, and then he started coaching Kay and her friends all the way through high school. And he also helped start the Hearst Soccer Association where we grew up. And so he touched a lot of kids' lives and a lot of families, and obviously that had a lot to do with me ending up becoming a coach myself. Dad was a blue-collar worker, worked his whole life, and he worked with his hands his whole life. His back was always hurt, his hands always hurt. He was just, he had worked a long and hard life, and so it was real common for Dad to have aches and pains. And he was 69 years old, and he still worked. And so Mom and Dad, they were always at my games, and it was a playoff game in Mineral Wells, and Dad always stood in the same place at my games. And so Dad was kind of my security blanket at my game. I always looked for Dad in the stands before the game, and then it was kind of like, okay, the security blanket's here, I can go on, right? So right before the game, I looked up for Dad, and he wasn't in the stands, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird, and I looked down, and I saw him on the field. Dad never came down on the field, and he was leaning up against the wall, kind of like holding himself up, and I just thought that was strange. And then after the game, I went to look for Dad, and he wasn't there, and I always talked to Dad after the game, and he was gone, and I just thought that was strange. And after the game, I talked to Mom, and I said, what was up with Dad at the game? She says his back's really hurting him bad. And the next morning, Mom called me, and she said, Dad can't get out of bed. I've called the ambulance. And I said, what do you mean you called the ambulance? She said his back is killing him, he can't move. And so they took him to the hospital, and sure enough, his L5 vertebrae had been completely eaten by cancer, and his spine had collapsed on top of itself. And they had found out that cancer was just all through his spine, and after more testing, they found out it was all over his body. And long story short, Kay and I probably think he probably knew he had something wrong with him. He just didn't say anything. He was just an old West Texas cuss who was meaner than hell, and wasn't gonna say anything to anybody. They started treatment. Fortunately, one of my former players worked for community hospice, and administratively, not at that downtown location, but she worked for it. And so I let her know Dad had cancer, and we kind of stayed in touch. And fortunately, staying in touch with her, she kind of talked me through the process. And once it was time for Dad to go to the hospice, she told me to pull the trigger, and I called him. And the whole from when we found out Dad was sick to when I called the hospice, it was a matter of 3 weeks. And then 3 days later, once he got there, he was gone. I had no idea what hospice was. No clue.
Yeah, we never even thought about taking him to hospice because it had such a bad image. Or
I had a negative connotation on what hospice was. I had no idea what it was.
And he, of course, wanted to, die in his backyard, and didn't even, I think he did the treatments that he did for us and for his grandkids.
It was a lot, and he was only alive 3 more weeks. It was just a lot to put him through in that 3-week period because the cancer was so advanced. I wish we would have gotten hospice involved earlier to know what level we could have made him comfortable and how much treatment we really needed to put him through,
Right.
because he suffered so much from the treatment. To me, the most important and it wasn't just the treatment they gave Dad. The treatment they gave Dad was exceptional. It was the treatment that they gave all of us. Before we got there, while we were there, after Dad passed, and then ever since then. Every time we see them, it's like we're seeing a family member, you know. And then the Christmas after Dad passed, the Christmas service we went to, the grief counseling afterwards, all the services that they have available to you, it's phenomenal. But the nurses that were on staff that explained what was happening to Dad while he was passing away, all the different stages that he was going through, they help you understand everything and talk you through step by step by step what is happening to your loved one while it's happening. And you understand why he's making those noises, why his body is changing the way it is while he's going through death, to understand that process and not just be sitting in a hospital watching him die.
Right.
Understanding what is physically happening to your loved one while they're passing, and be okay with what's happening, because you know what's happening. That was a really, comforting and reassuring feeling for me, to understand it's okay and that this is normal, what's happening to my father.
It's like a safe space where you can ask questions, all the questions you want. It's a place where you can know that there's other people that are looking out for your loved one as much as you want.
I just think of everything comforting when I think of hospice. I think of Mom's hug. That's what I think of when I think of hospice. I think of my mom's hug. Just that ultimate, just comforting, anything comforting. That's what I think of when I think of hospice.
My father dying was probably the best experience, because since then our mother has passed away, and she passed away so quickly that we didn't have the opportunity to even call community hospice. And just sitting in the hospital waiting for her to pass away was far harder on both of us and her friends than it was to be in community hospice and know step by step what's happening. And so you say hospice was the best experience.
Those people are amazing in what they do, and the fact that they're a nonprofit and take care of so many people at that time, that people shouldn't have to worry about finances and insurance and things like that. And when we found out, because our father had insurance, we didn't have to worry about money when Dad was passing. But while we were in the hospital, we found out they were a nonprofit and that they were taking care of families that didn't have money and didn't have insurance. Well, I had always done a tournament. My whole coaching career, I'd hosted tournaments, and it was a fundraiser for my teams, to buy equipment, to buy uniforms and things like that. But when I heard that this hospice was a nonprofit and they were raising money for families that didn't have money, and I thought, what they're doing for my dad, it was a no-brainer. I talked to Kay and I was like, we got to turn this tournament, we're going to rename it after Dad because of all the things he did for our community and the kids in our community, starting in a soccer association in Hearst, Texas, and all he did for our friends and the community and everything else. We're going to rename this tournament after Dad, and we're going to give every freaking penny back to the hospice every year. Just because there's people out there that need the care like our dad got. So why not use my tournament as a vehicle to teach my players and my parents and my school and my community about something that's great out there, and about something that people don't know much about, the hospice.
I knew that my dad would be incredibly upset that we have used his name and his picture because he wasn't that kind of person. He liked to be in the background, and so we always knew that he would
He'd be mad as
he
hell.
would just be so angry at us that we did that. But I also think he raised us to give back to people because he always thought of doing the right things in life. And so for us, it was like a no-brainer, like this is what he would want. And we also wanted to keep raising money for hospice. So this was a perfect way to be able to give back to them. We're just two kids who
love our dad and appreciate what he did for us, and we just wanted to say thanks to the hospice. We just appreciate what they did for our father, and we just want everybody that comes to the hospice to have the same opportunity that my dad did.